Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching the Prophetic Dateline from. We have such a group of that. Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching the Prophetic Dateline from. We have such a group of the Apostolic Council of Prophetic Elders. We don't have the whole group, but we have part of a group, and we're going to start bringing more and more on so that we can really hear from everyone. This is the prophetic year 5780, and in the Hebrew, it stands for the voice or the mouth. And if any word was apropos, it is certainly this one for us today. As we are doing this prophetic dateline, there are riots in the streets.
Yeah, and as you know, Cindy, one of the things that we have learned through spiritual warfare through the years is that Satan always mocks the particular gifting. So he's going to be mocking the system. And one of the things that you'll see manifesting is him trying to shut down the voice, particularly the voice of the kingdom, the voice of the church.
Yeah, and the voice of different people that have been hurting a long, long time. And we're going to talk about some of that today. We're going to talk about things concerning China. We're going to talk about different prophets that received prophecies about rioting on a wide variety of areas. The Bible says in Amos 3:7 that God doesn't do anything, but he first shows his servants, the prophets. And what we have found through the many years, some 20 years of having prophetic roundtables, is that God doesn't reveal to any one prophet everything, and that he reveals and he speaks in different ways. He speaks to seers. You know, James Gall is a dreamer, and he's a seer. We have other ones in our group that are dreamers, seers, some of them, and the inspiration of the moment. We have as a group a great linking to intercession as well. And we are certainly in what Revelation 12 is talking about. The heavens are very violent right now. Satan is coming down with great wrath because he knows his time is short. We'll even get into, if we have time, a little talk about Matthew 24 and nations rising up against nations. And so this is just an incredible time. We have been writing up some of the things that we have been receiving. And so this season we're in is going so fast. It's like, okay, it was COVID, but now everybody's in the streets and nobody cares about COVID, you know, and then, but what should the rest of everybody do if they're not in a protest? And it's just really interesting. I know that Will and Haviland have called for prayer. They're having a prayer meeting here, and we're going to be joining them. So I think it would be good to just go ahead and segue to Will Ford and just share a little bit what God has been giving you, Will.
Yeah, most definitely. Honored to be on here with all my friends here from all around the world. We're just on a Dateline with Cindy, talking specifically about what's happening right now with healing the racial divide in America right now. We talked about this latest development with what happened with George Floyd, which was horrible, horrible death. And it really has awakened a lot of people to just kind of where we are with some areas that need to be addressed with policing. Amazing police officers, and I hate when one person puts a blight on all these amazing officers, but it did show just systemically and culturally how God is putting his finger on bringing greater awareness and bringing greater healing and dismantling some of these other areas. But then at the same time, we just found out 6 police officers have been killed in the middle of all the riots and all the looting that has taken place, and it's horrific. My heart breaks for that. It was myself and my wife and Sean Smith together in a gathering with Cindy was there, and there was the deputy police chief for the city of Dallas was who had just lost 5 police officers that were killed there on Elm Street in a rally, and he actually washed my wife's feet. He washed Sean Smith's feet, and we turned around and washed his feet. And there needs to come healing for these people who have taken on this profession as well, and who lay down their lives every day to protect us. So what we're seeing right now, so I'm picking up where we left off in this last time of the Dateline. I want you, everybody who's with me, we're going to go someplace on this Dateline where it's not just about what's happening with one ethnic group, black and white conflicts. We're not going to just talk about what's happening with Asia, or what's just happening here in this nation with Asian America. We're talking about what's happening globally. So I want you to expand your view. All right. So if you have the bandwidth and your heart is in a good place, I need you to go with us on this, because we need your intercession right now. We need you to intercede for what God is wanting to do globally right now. The enemy is trying to raise up this thing where nation is literally rising against nation. For 4 months, before anything happened with some of the altercations that have happened around the country, like Ahmaud Arbery there in Brunswick, Georgia, and Breonna Taylor there in Louisville, Kentucky, and now this latest conflict that's happened with George Floyd, or the police officers who were just killed recently. For the past 4 months, I've been dealing with trying to heal the divide and heal some of the conflict that's been going on with Asian Americans in this nation. Because of the coronavirus, they have been the target of horrible attacks, verbally and literally. For example, here in Texas, there was a man who, white man, took a knife to an Asian family and began stabbing them, slashed a little 2-year-old boy's forehead just simply because he was Asian. And he blamed them for bringing the coronavirus into our nation. It's horrible. Seen other ugly videos. I saw one, a Chinese American was there in San Francisco and was attacked verbally and physically by a gang of African American kids. And I've been talking to other of my Asian friends and other leaders around the country, trying to heal this divide, finding out that 70% of these conflicts against them have been coming from people that look like me, people in the African American community. And so what I want you to see is this is not just a black and white thing that's going on right now. This is nation trying to rise up against nation. The looting that happened, all the things that have happened recently, maybe Herman will talk more about that when he comes on. But again, Asian shop owners, just like it was with the time of the Rodney King riots, lost a lot of their businesses. They were looted, their stores were destroyed. A lot of that, again, maybe African Americans and other minorities, but then you have Antifa and all these other groups who are being funded by billionaires, inciting these riots, setting bricks in the middle of the streets, just waiting for somebody to grab them and throw them in a place. Somebody else is behind this, of course. We know beyond Antifa, beyond any billionaires, our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against principalities and powers. It's against spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places, right? So I'm reminded of that time when Jesus was trying to go through Samaria, and Samaria, the Samaritans and the Jews, they had a racial tension between each other. They had religious tension against each other. And Jesus was trying to cut through a Samaritan neighborhood. And I remember growing up, there were certain neighborhoods that I couldn't cut through. Some of them were black, and they were gang affiliated or whatever, and I couldn't cut through that neighborhood. Or there was a Latino neighborhood and a white neighborhood. There was just some neighborhoods you couldn't cut through for whatever reason. And so Jesus tries to cut through this Samaritan neighborhood, and they wouldn't let him cut through. And so the disciples who had just seen Jesus transfigured, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call down fire from heaven and destroy this place? You want to release fire?" And that's what we see now. These fires being released all over the nation in response to some racial take on what's happening with all this going on right now, the racial tension. But Jesus said something that was so profound. He said this. He said, "You don't know what spirit you're speaking from. The Son of Man didn't come to destroy man's lives, but to save them." But the thing that's so powerful in that is this: you don't know what spirit you're speaking from. And that's where we are right now with this situation right now. Sometimes with this whole thing, we don't know what spirit we're speaking from. Sometimes we think we want justice, but really we want revenge. We don't know what spirit we're speaking from. And the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. And the enemy knows this. So he's trying to inflame this whole situation. But let me tell you, God is not surprised by any of the things that are going on. He's given myself, several others, words about what was going to happen this summer in terms of the riots breaking out. Had no idea what that was going to look like, but we've been praying against it. But we also need to expand our understanding of this. This is not just about America. This is about a global harvest that the enemy is trying to prevent. God's not surprised by it, but he needs your prayers. He chooses to need your prayers for us to war in this time about this. Last thing I'll say is this. It's interesting. There in Wuhan, where this coronavirus came out, that is the place where the underground Chinese church is very vibrant. They were taking a strong stand against some of the injustices that were going there from the Chinese Communist Party. And it was in that place where the enemy has this thing start to break down. In other words, what I'm saying is this: there is an attack from the enemy to try to muzzle the Asian church in this hour, because they are catalytic to this global awakening that God wants to release. So that's all I wanted to say, just as a setup to this. You're going to hear from some amazing leaders who are more well-versed than I am in this, but this is bigger. Something bigger is going on. That's all I want you to say. That's what I want to say right now. Something bigger is going on. Engage God's heart for this right now.
Yeah, and one thing you said, maybe we'll come back to on the Tuesday Dateline, was that you talked about relationships. You talked about stay at the table together, table of communion. And this is a great communion revival. So we want to make sure that we stay together. And let's jump over to Herman Martir. Herman has been used a lot. He's head of major networks for Asian American Pacific Islanders. And he himself has suffered racism. I don't know if he wants me to even mention that, but recently. But on a broader scale, we know there's racism all over the world. We have heard in Guangzhou that blacks were not allowed into McDonald's and things like that. So we want to stamp out racism wherever it is and whatever it looks like, and the systemic. But as prophets, we need to cry out against this.
Amen. Cindy, I'm always careful when I talk about race, because people think I'm Hispanic, but sometimes they say, why are you talking about Asian issues when you're Hispanic? I said, no, I'm Filipino American. And so that's really something I believe that is happening in our country today, that we have this different stereotypes and, a lot of division happening. But the thing about this, the question I'm always asking, is this really an issue of race? Because I think it's beyond the issue of race. I think this is an issue. There's a war for the souls of humanity and for the destiny of nations. And I believe, as a student of history, and also I'm learning to walk this social justice issue and walk with the people like Bishop Harry Jackson, Cindy Jacobs, Mike, and Lou Welford, and among many others. And so as an Asian American, we've never really been in the forefront of the social justice issue. But one thing I know for sure, the social issue or social justice issue has been hijacked by special interest group socialists whose sole to divide, to conquer, and to destroy. And I think we're in a moment in history where I feel so bad for what happened to George Floyd, and the reason why is that the Asian element to it, because one of the policemen that was arrested involved in that with that crime was an Asian American, a Hmong. So I got a call from Church Sis and say, what are we going to do about it? We want to get involved. We have churches, we have businesses that are being burned on about 10 cities right now, and one city in Minnesota, about 10 Asian businesses burned to the ground. And I think, my friends, it is important that we understand there's a war raging for the destiny of nations. But I just want to ask every one of you, black, white, yellow, brown, let's not take action to appease a certain issue, because sometimes we make heroes and martyrs out of people that are not really real models of justice. They're not really real models of the kingdom, but we create a martyr out of them because there's such a hatred towards a certain group of people, maybe the white or a Hispanic or an Asian. So when the crime is committed, a lot of times we are so clouded, our people's mind and perception are so clouded that they focus on the hatred, on the crime, and not actually trying to understand what the actual issue is. And sometimes we build heroes out of people that are actually not heroes. You know, I mean, to tell you honestly, as an Asian American, crime has been committed to us since COVID-19, even beyond that, you know, the founding of this country, you know, since the founding of this country. But I think there's a season and time where we're saying, you know, we have to take ownership of our nation. Because if as America falls, so goes the nations of the earth. And America is the beacon of democracy and liberty. People watching in India, people watching in the Philippines, people watching all over the world, and say what America will become. The decisions and the steps we take today will determine the destiny of nations. And I think we're in that place where nations are groaning and travailing for the revealings of the sons of God. And I'm just careful, Cindy, because I serve this. But I believe the foundation of liberty of any country must be built on truth. Must be built on truth, not trying to appease, not on social justice that I think tainted with hatred. You know, I was invited by Bernice King and the King family to celebrate about 3 years ago the death of Martin Luther. So we had a lot of politicians there in that church in Atlanta, and people were screaming foul. People were shouting death to this government, death to the government. And we were put in one section and said, oh, you guys are from this, from the group, or you're representative of this political group or a certain leader. And so I was marginalized, I was Asian, and then they were screaming, you know, I mean, a lot of profanity inside that church building. Now think about that. And so Bernice King stood up and said, if you try to address the issue of race and inequality and injustice, but you have hatred in your heart, then you will not be able to resolve any of this issue. You cannot speak to hatred when you have hatred in your heart, when you have unforgiveness in your heart. You cannot address this issue of race unless you walk in love and forgiveness. And I think this is where we at right now. You know, a lot of people I see marching in the cities, they go there to sympathize, right? But the truth is that it's good to sympathize with those who are victims of injustice, but I believe do it because you love God, you love people, not to just appease or you just look good and so that you can have some kind of a narrative to talk about on Facebook or anything else. So I think, Cindy, that's a little evaluation I've had. There's a war in Asia right now for the control of nations, and I know socialism is advancing, and in our country where our democracy is built on constitutional framework, not on socialism, you know, I believe this is the last bastion of freedom that we have to protect, because the model that we created will affect the nations.
Yes, thank you, Herman. And I want to say something that you're not saying, or don't mean to say. You're not saying George Floyd was an unworthy model.
No, I'm not. I am not.
Yeah, and so I heard you, and I'm just trying to cover your back there because
I'm
you know,
I'm just talking about the criminals that are hijacking this issue.
Right, exactly.
They're marching in the streets and say we're for George Floyd, and they're marching supposedly for freedom and social issues, justice issue, right. But actually they're not. So
right, they're actually co-opting something that has to be said. You know, one thing I want to say is we have worked on racial reconciliation in the church for 30 years, but perhaps we didn't get off the church mountain enough that we actually helped heal broken systems of police brutality. We know every policeman's not brutal. We thank God for our first responders, but there were things that were systemically broken, but we either didn't know how or we didn't see that we needed to address it. And a lot of times I think that people think people are silent when they're more ignorant or not knowing something should be done. So I know that Herman and his wife, Regina, they were just at a Costco and they had racial assaults. They've had that happen in more than once, and this is recent. So we want to root this out everywhere. And so this is a year of the mouth and voice. We have to all ask ourselves, what should we do?